Misrepresentation is built on the paradox of an impenetrable surface, where the player is neither fully engaged nor fully disengaged, but instead oscillates between participation and non-participation. As an interactive installation, misrepresentation operates within the space of contradiction, irony, and the Deleuzian event. It encourages players to explore the tensions between enrolling, that is, identifying with an avatar, and derolling, that is, detaching from it. The installation consists of a dark room where the player encounters 4 key objects: a desk computer running the game, a tiny mechanical bug carrying a key, a stepping box, and a projector. The game itself appears to follow the conventions of an escape room, where players solve puzzles to move through a series of visually distinct rooms. However, as the player navigates through these rooms, each with different aesthetic styles and configurations, they begin to realize that the entire game is a recursive loop, an endless sliding across an impermeable surface. At the core of misrepresentation is the contradiction between the escape room structure and the exhibition format. While escape room games rely on the challenge of solving puzzles to exit a confined space, the player in misrepresentation is always free to physically leave. This contradiction echoes a simple logical paradox. Just as a programmer might mistakenly introduce a break statement that halts execution prematurely, the player can simply break the game by walking away. Engagement is nowhere to be found. The game is, therefore, either a misrepresentation of the author's intention if the error is on the program's side, or a misinterpretation of the author's design if the error is on the player's side. For Deleuze, irony is superior, arriving too early and having already missed the event. Humor opens up to the encounter with the event, where intelligence always comes later. In this scenario, irony offers the player a binary choice: the superior and intelligent choice of break, or the humorous choice to keep playing. Misrepresentation is not about achieving a goal but about experiencing the tension of an unresolved event, one that is always happening yet never fully realized. Paradox, as Deleuze argues, is Alice's becoming larger and smaller at the same moment. Alice is growing larger than what she is now, and she is now smaller than what she will become. The latter way of playing this game is both a playing and a non-playing, an affirmation and a negation of the author's intent. To break is to be ironical, to discern the paradox as a binary choice and opt for the finite, but to keep playing is to endure the humor. They will always endure the lure of break, dragging the player in the opposite direction all the time. A quote from The Logic of Sense: which way, asks Alice, sensing that it is always in both directions at the same time. The present is always eluded: jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today. Do cats eat bats is as good as do bats eat cats, the reversal of active and passive, the reversal of cause and effect, to cry before having pricked oneself. Paradoxes elude the present, confusing past and future, reversing active and passive, cause and effect. All these paradoxes dissolve Alice's identity or the proper or singular name, for identity is governed by the permanence of savoir, the knowing pertaining to the logical, rational, linear, knowable, and common sense. It is in this sense that misrepresentation makes the player's identification with their avatar unstable. In majoritarian RPGs, players gradually merge with their avatars through narrative investment and mechanical repetition. Games like Fallout 4 use the mirror scene as a moment of enrolling, where the player sees their avatar and steps into their virtual identity. From that point forward, the game strengthens the bond between player and character through a structured narrative and clear goals. In contrast, misrepresentation disrupts the enrolling process by blurring the boundary between the player and the protagonist. At one point, the player encounters a frame that could either be a mirror reflecting their avatar or a painting of the character. The ambiguity forces the player to question their relationship with the game world. Are they seeing themselves, an artwork, or something else entirely? The game also incorporates mechanics that force the player to momentarily withdraw from their avatar. In key moments, the protagonist acts autonomously if the player remains inactive. The protagonist physically exits the game console in one sequence, acknowledging their fictional status. The protagonist becomes an other as the player withdraws, and if the separation is too long, they will sometimes become even more autonomous. This again serves as a paradox that dissolves the identity between the player and the protagonist, troubling the already ambiguous enrolling process. The protagonist becomes an other that rejects to be dwelled in. This autonomy makes the protagonist no longer an empty vessel, but instead leaves the realm of unreality and penetrates into the player's reality. Also, perspectives and stylistic changes in each room, from completely top-down and flat 2D to rooms with pseudo-depth or height, are supposed to further distract and interrupt the immersion of gameplay. These perspective-shifting moments are, in fact, techniques used in the game's derolling, which usually occurs only near the end of a game. However, no matter how far away the player is alienated by my tricks, the lure of identification will always be there. As Benjamin noted, imitation is at home in the playing, not in the plaything. Even when playing with inanimate toys such as trains and windmills, compulsive mimetic identification prevails. The enrolling in misrepresentation, therefore, is always neither a smooth identification nor a complete alienation, but a paradox, a becoming, an event in the Deleuzian sense. What I am truly interested in is the idea of bleeding. In LARP, that is live-action role-playing, bleed refers to the emotional and psychological carryover between a player's character and their real-life self. Traditional video games minimize this phenomenon by maintaining clear boundaries between player and avatar, often concluding with a narrative resolution that facilitates derolling. In misrepresentation, I long for the kind of bleeding that is more intimate or essential to bodies than simply being cut, a bleed that does not rely on enrolling to occur, and does not heal after derolling. I try to introduce a different kind of bleeding, one that is not based on emotional investment but on the persistent tension between enrolling and derolling. The game refuses to let the player settle into a stable role, instead forcing them to oscillate between identification and detachment. This continuous movement creates a sense of dissolution, where the player is neither fully immersed nor completely removed. In this way, the player does not simply play as a character but as a dissolved self, caught in the paradox of engagement and disengagement. I now define bleeding as the tension of enroll and derol between the player and the character that destabilizes the player's own subjectivity, or to say, the impersonal coherence within the tension between enroll and derol's continuous, if not perpetual, movement towards and away from each other. The player enters and exits the protagonists many times, and in the end, could really only play as their dissolved selves, using their own body to confront the entire game world, agonized by the paradox of break or not break. This is the kind of player body that is always already porous and mixed, like a drop of wine in the ocean.